The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and I almost did not answer it. The number was my Aunt Celeste's, and Celeste had not spoken to me in 3 years. Not a birthday text, not a Christmas message, not a single word across the full length of what had been done to me and what I had survived in the aftermath of it. 3 years of silence from a woman who had known me since I was born, who had held me at my christening, who had sat across from me at every Thanksgiving table for 28 years before the silence started. I stared at the phone for 4 rings. Then I answered, because I am the kind of person who answers even when the answering costs something, which is both my greatest strength and the reason I was in this situation in the first place. Celeste's voice was not composed. Celeste was always composed. She was 61 years old and had spent a career as a high school principal and had the specific emotional register of someone who had navigated 30 years of adolescent crisis without raising her own voice. The person on the phone was not that woman. The person on the phone was terrified. She said, "Miriam, it's about Jade's baby. Something is wrong and they're saying there might be a blood-type situation and the doctors are asking about family and Jade won't tell them anything and Miriam, please, please, Jade was my cousin." Jade was 26 years old and the person who had told my entire family, 3 years ago, a version of events involving me that was so far from what had actually happened that I had spent the first 6 months after believing it could not possibly hold. It had held. My family had believed every word of it. They had cut me off with the specific thoroughness of people who had decided and did not want to be unsettled by counter-evidence. And now Jade's baby was in a hospital and there was a blood-type situation and Celeste was on the phone saying please. I was quiet for 3 seconds. Then I said, "Which hospital? Because that is also who I am." The person who shows up when a child needs something, regardless of what their mother did to me, regardless of what 3 years of family silence costs a person, regardless of everything. The person who answers, "Let me tell you how we got here. Let me tell you all of it. Because the story of why I was the only one who could save Jade's baby is the same story as why Jade had made sure, for 3 years, that I could not be found. My name is Miriam Osei Callahan. I am 34 years old. I am an emergency medicine physician at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. I have been an emergency physician for 3 years, which means I have been practicing medicine during precisely the same period that my family believed I was the kind of person my cousin Jade said I was. I find a particular irony in this, that the years in which I was professionally dedicated to saving lives regardless of who those lives belonged to were the years my family had decided I was not worth knowing. The irony does not make it hurt less, but it makes it legible in a way that helps. I need to tell you about my family before I tell you about Jade, because the structure of the family is the reason what Jade did worked as well as it did. The Osei family, my mother's side. The side that matters to this story is large, close, and organized around a specific gravitational center. My grandmother Nana Abena, who at 74 is the most formidable woman I have ever encountered in a life that has included some genuinely formidable women. Nana Abena was born in Kumasi, came to the United States at 25, raised 6 children on a combination of will and precision, and has spent the last 30 years in Atlanta as the axis around which the entire family orbits. In the Osei family, Nana Abena's opinion is not one input among many. It is the weather. It shapes what is possible and what is not, what is said and what is left unsaid, who is in favor and who has fallen from it. This is not tyranny exactly. She is not cruel, and she does not wield her authority with malice. She simply has a clarity about how things should be, developed over 74 years of being right about more things than most people are right about, and the family has organized itself around that clarity the way a compass organizes itself around north. I am my mother Edwoa's only child. My mother is the third of Nana Abena's 6 children, steady, professional, a pediatric nurse for 22 years, a woman who has always been more comfortable in the middle of the family than at its edges. She loves me with a completeness that has never been in question. She also, during the 3 years in question, sat in silence at the family gatherings from which I had been excluded, because questioning Nana Abena's determination that I had wronged Jade was not something my mother knew how to do directly and survive the relationship with her mother intact. I do not blame my mother for this. I have spent 3 years working on not blaming my mother for this, and I have largely succeeded, which is its own form of accomplishment. Jade Mensa is the daughter of my Uncle Quame, Nana Abena's second child. She is 26 and was 23 when the situation occurred, and she is beautiful in the specific way that has always made her the center of attention in rooms she entered. And she has always known this about herself and has organized her life around it in ways that worked well for her until the moment they did not. Jade and I were close. I want to say this clearly because the betrayal has a context, and the context is genuine affection. We were 8 years apart, but had always maintained a relationship that was more substantial than the usual cousin dynamic. I had been a kind of informal older sister to her, the one who answered her questions about college applications, who talked to her about relationships when she was navigating the specific difficulties of her early 20s. Who showed up for her in the small, consistent ways that build the kind of trust she later used against me. What happened between us, the thing that became the story Jade told the family, began at a family gathering in the summer 3 years ago. A birthday party for Nana Abena. The whole family assembled, as they always assembled for Nana Abena's birthdays, at my Aunt Celeste's house in Decatur, where the backyard was large enough to hold everyone. I was there with my then partner, a man named David. David and I had been together for 2 years, and the relationship was in the complicated late stage where you are either going to move toward something permanent or acknowledge that you are not. We were in that stage, and it was generating the specific low-grade tension that such stages generate, and I was managing it with the resources I had available, which were limited, because I had been on call for 6 days straight before the party and was operating on insufficient sleep and insufficient emotional reserves. At the party, David met Jade for the first time. I will tell you what I saw. A charming young woman being charming, a tired man being more susceptible to charm than he would have been if he had not been tired. An ordinary social interaction that registered to me as something to note but not to address at a birthday party. I noted it. I did not address it at the party. What happened after the party, in the weeks that followed, was that Jade and David began communicating privately. I discovered this approximately 6 weeks later through the specific mundane mechanism of a phone left unlocked on a counter. I addressed it with David. The relationship ended, not because David had done anything that crossed an unambiguous line, but because the trust had been damaged in a way that I did not think was worth the effort of repair given where we already were. I addressed it with Jade separately. That conversation was hard and honest and ended with Jade crying and me leaving and both of us saying things that needed to be said even though the saying of them was painful. I thought the conversation had closed it. It had not closed it. What Jade did in the weeks after that conversation was construct a narrative and bring it to Nana Abena. The narrative, as it reached me through the subsequent family communications, described me as having behaved abusively toward Jade, having confronted her in a manner that was threatening, having said things that were cruel and personal, having made her feel unsafe, in a way that she communicated to Nana Abena, with the specific distress that Nana Abena, who loved all her grandchildren with a ferocity that made her vulnerable to their distress, was unable to receive without response. Nana Abena called my mother. My mother called me. I told my mother what had actually happened. She believed me, I think, in the way that she believed me, which is to say she believed the version that did not require her to choose between me and her mother. She said she would talk to Nana Abena. She did talk to Nana Abena. Nana Abena had already spoken to Jade 4 times and to 3 of her other children and had determined that I had done something that could not be overlooked. I was not invited to that determination. I was not asked for my account in any way that was genuine rather than procedural. The family closed around Jade and the story Jade had told, and I was left outside it. The first month I spent in disbelief. The second month I spent in grief. The third month I spent in anger, which was clarifying even though it was exhausting. By the sixth month, I had arrived at something that was not acceptance exactly. Acceptance implies you agree with the terms, but was closer to the understanding that I could not control what my family believed and could control only what I did with my own life. What I did with my own life was finish my residency, pass my board certification, accept the position at Grady Memorial, build a practice in emergency medicine that was demanding and meaningful, and that left very little room for the kind of sustained grief that requires stillness to fully inhabit. I made friends who became my chosen family in the specific way that chosen family forms when the family of origin has vacated. I had a therapist, Dr. Renata James, who had been working with me since month 4 and who had helped me understand the specific dynamics of family systems and scapegoating, and the way that a narrative, once established in a tight family unit, becomes self-reinforcing regardless of its accuracy. I built a life that was good. It was also a life that was missing something I could not fully replace. Not the family gatherings. I found I missed those less than I expected, or perhaps had been missing them for longer than I admitted. Given the specific role I had always occupied in the Osai family as the achiever whose achievements were celebrated, but who was subtly separate from the warmth of belonging in a way I had always felt, but never fully named. What I missed was my mother, whom I still spoke to, quietly, on the side, in phone calls that Beverly attended to with love, and with the specific guilt of a woman who knew what she was not doing and could not find a way to do it. I missed Nana Abena, which surprised me. Not the authority of her, but the specific warmth of her when I was in her good standing. The particular feeling of being seen by someone who had known you your whole life and whose approval meant something because it was not easily given. 3 years. Grady Memorial. Emergency medicine. The 11:47 call on a Tuesday night. Which hospital, I said, and I went. The drive to Piedmont Atlanta Hospital took 19 minutes at that hour. I spent those 19 minutes doing what I do in the 90 seconds between receiving a case and seeing the patient. I organized the information I had, identified the gaps, and prepared to think clearly in the presence of emotion. What I knew. Jade had delivered a baby at some point in the recent past, which I had not known because Jade's pregnancy had occurred during the 3 years of silence, and no one had told me. The baby was experiencing something that the doctors had described to Celeste as a blood type situation. Jade was not providing family history information. What I understood from this, a blood type incompatibility issue. The most likely scenario was Rh incompatibility, a condition where a mother who is Rh negative carries a baby who is Rh positive, which can cause the mother's immune system to attack the baby's red blood cells in subsequent pregnancies, or in certain scenarios in a first pregnancy. The treatment is well established. The urgency depends on severity, the gap I had not filled, why I specifically was needed. Celeste had said there might be a blood type situation and that Jade would not provide family history. I was a physician. I was family. But what specifically had generated Celeste's call to me, I found out when I arrived. Celeste was in the family waiting area on the maternity floor. She was 61 and had managed 30 years of adolescent crisis, and she was holding a paper coffee cup with both hands like it was something to hold on to. When she saw me, something in her face moved through several things quickly: relief, guilt, something that was trying to be apologetic and was succeeding imperfectly. She stood up. She said, "Thank you for coming. I know I had no right to call you." I said, "Tell me what's happening." She told me. Jade's baby, a boy 4 days old named Eli, was experiencing hemolytic disease of the newborn. His red blood cells were being destroyed. He needed a blood transfusion, and the blood type situation was more complex than standard Rh incompatibility. There was an additional antibody factor that the hospital's blood bank was working to match. The standard donor pool had not produced a compatible match quickly enough, and the team was requesting family blood typing in case a directed donor could be found. Jade had refused to provide family history or permit family contact. I said, "Why?" Celeste said, "Because of everything." Because she didn't want you involved. She didn't want any of us involved who might reach out to you. I stood in that waiting area and held this information. Jade had kept her pregnancy from the family, or from the part of the family that might have told me, in part to prevent me from knowing. And now her baby was sick, and the doctors needed family blood typing information that might help identify a compatible donor, and Jade had refused to provide it because providing it opened the door to me. She had protected her narrative even in a neonatal crisis. The hospital's attending neonatologist came out to speak with Celeste while I was there. His name was Dr. Anand Patel, 42, the specific controlled urgency manner of a physician who is managing a serious situation without alarming anyone further. He looked at me with the particular attention that physicians give to other physicians they have identified in a family group. Something shifted in his register, a slight recalibration. He said, "Are you family?" I said, "I'm a cousin. I'm also an emergency physician at Grady." He said, "Then you understand what I'm going to explain." He explained. The hemolytic disease was moderate to severe. The antibody involved was a rare alloantibody antikel, which meant that compatible blood was significantly harder to source than standard type matching. The hospital had been working the regional blood bank network and had one potential unit, but needed to confirm it was adequate for the transfusion volume required. A directed donation from a compatible family member could provide a more reliable option while they continued sourcing. The family blood typing that Jade had refused to permit was the fastest pathway to identifying whether any of us could donate. I said, "I'll be typed." Dr. Patel said, "We'll need the patient's consent to include family members in the directed donation process." I said, "Does the patient know I'm here?" He said, "Not yet." I said, "Then that conversation needs to happen now." He looked at me for a moment, assessing. A physician reading another physician. He said, "Will you come with me?" I said yes. The room was small, and the light was the specific quality of hospital light at midnight, functional and honest, in a way that removes the possibility of pretense. Jade was 26 and had just given birth 4 days ago, and her baby was sick, and she had been awake for most of those 4 days, and she looked it. She looked young in a way she had not looked at 23 when she had made the choices she made, or perhaps I was seeing her differently from a distance of 3 years and a hospital room in crisis. She looked up when Dr. Patel opened the door. She looked at me. What crossed her face in that moment was something I will not describe in reductive terms because it contained too many things to reduce. 3 years of a story she had told. The baby in the NICU 1 floor above. The specific reckoning of someone who has built a wall and is now on the wrong side of it when the fire comes. She said, "Miriam." I said, "I'm here because Celeste called me and I came." I'm not here to have any conversation about anything that happened 3 years ago. I'm here because your son needs help and I'm family, and I'm typed O negative, which is a universal donor for red cells, and I want to be tested for Kel antigen status, because if I'm Kel negative, I may be able to donate for him. She stared at me. I said, "But Dr. Patel needs your consent to include me in the directed donation process, so I need you to say yes." The silence was long, not the silence of someone deciding. The silence of someone already past the decision, moving through the specific geography of what it costs to arrive there. She said, "Yes." Dr. Patel moved efficiently. I was taken to have blood drawn within 10 minutes. The typing confirmed O negative. The Kel antigen testing, faster in-house than I expected. Piedmont had a solid blood bank team, confirmed Kel negative. I was compatible. The donation was completed in the early morning hours. Eli received the transfusion as the sky outside the hospital windows was beginning the specific gray of pre-dawn. By 6 in the morning, Dr. Patel came to tell Jade, and the family members who had accumulated in the waiting room through the night. Celeste, my Uncle Quame, who had driven in from Marietta, and my mother, who had been called by Celeste and had come without telling me she was coming, that Eli was responding. By 8 in the morning, the response was strong. By 10, Dr. Patel said the word stable. I was sitting in the family waiting area when my mother found me. She had arrived somewhere around 3 in the morning and had sat across the room from me through the early hours. And we had looked at each other in the specific way of people who have a great deal to say and have chosen the right moment to say none of it. When the news came about Eli, she crossed the room and sat beside me and took my hand and held it without speaking. I let her hold it. We sat that way for a long time. Quame came out at some point and sat across from me and said, in the voice of a man who was arriving at something slowly and did not entirely know how to complete the arrival, "You didn't have to come." I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "No, you didn't. After everything, you didn't have to." I looked at my uncle, who I had known for 34 years and who had sat at Nana Abena's table and accepted the determination about me without, as far as I knew, asking the questions that would have complicated it. I said Eli needed someone who could help him. I could help him. That's the only accounting that mattered tonight. Quame nodded slowly. Then he said, the other accounting. We owe you something for that. I said, yes, you do. And the honesty of that, the simple, direct yes, without softening it, without making it easier for him than it needed to be, was something I could not have managed 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I would have said it was fine, or that I just wanted to move forward, or some version of the accommodating untruth that I had always deployed to manage the Osai family's comfort at the expense of my own. I did not do that. I said yes, you do, and I let it sit. The conversation with Nana Abena happened 2 weeks later. She called me herself, which was significant. Nana Abena has never, in 74 years, been required to make a call she would have preferred to receive, and the act of calling was its own statement about what the 2 weeks since the hospital had produced in her internal accounting. She said, "Miriam, come to dinner on Sunday." I said, "I'll come." I went. The house was the same. The smell of the house was the same. The specific combination of Nana Abena's cooking and the potpourri she has kept in the hallway for 30 years, and something underneath both of those things that was simply the smell of that house, which was the smell of my childhood in a way that nothing else was. I stood in the doorway for a moment before I went in, because the body remembers things that the mind has been trying to organize, and sometimes the body's memory arrives before you are ready for it. Nana Abena was in the kitchen. She looked older than she had 3 years ago, which was simply true. She looked at me when I came in with the specific attention of someone who is seeing a thing clearly that they had been looking at through a lens, and the lens has been removed. She said, "Sit down." I sat. She did not apologize with language. Nana Abena is not a woman who uses language for apology. She uses it for declaration, for instruction, for the specific kinds of love that can be spoken. Apology in her register is expressed through action. She made me the meal I had loved since childhood. She sat across from me and asked about my work with the genuine interest of someone who had always been proud of me and had, for 3 years, been required to set that pride aside. At some point in the evening, she said, Jade came to me. I said, "I know," she said. "She told me what she should have told me 3 years ago." I waited. She said, "She told me the truth." I sat with that. What Jade had apparently told Nana Abena in the 2 weeks since the hospital was a version of events that was closer to what had actually happened. Not a full accounting, perhaps, not every particular, but enough. Enough to displace the version that had been in place. Enough for Nana Abena, whose pride in being right was significant but whose love for her family was larger than her pride, to understand that she had presided over a determination that was wrong. I said, "What made her tell you now?" Nana Abena looked at me with the expression she wore when she was going to say something true and wanted you to receive it precisely. She said, "She told me she watched you walk into that hospital after 3 years of what we did to you and donate blood for her son without asking for anything. She said she could not carry it anymore. I thought about Jade in that hospital room. 26 years old and exhausted, and the baby sick, and the wall she had built meeting the person it was built to exclude in the corridor outside her door. I thought about what it costs to tell the truth after you have told something else for 3 years and built a life around the telling. I thought about Eli, who was 4 days old and had no relationship to any of this and needed someone whose blood was compatible. I said, "How is she?" Nana Abena said, "She is struggling. She is asking if you will speak with her." I was quiet for a moment. I said, "I need some time with that question." Nana Abena nodded. She did not push. That too was new, the not pushing, the making of room for my answer on my timeline rather than hers. 3 years and a hospital and a truth finally told had rearranged something in how she held the space between us. I took 3 weeks with the question. Doctor. James and I spent 2 sessions on it. Not on whether to meet Jade. I knew I would eventually. But on what I needed to bring to that meeting and what I could not give it, and what the difference between reconciliation and resolution was, and which one I was actually pursuing. I was pursuing resolution. The distinction mattered. Reconciliation implies a return to what was. What was had never been honest. The closeness Jade, and I had before the lie was built on her understanding of me, that included the knowledge that I would absorb and accommodate and manage her comfort the way I had always managed everyone's comfort in the Osai family. I did not want to return to that. I did not want to be the person who accommodated this into softness. Resolution was something different. Resolution was the acknowledgement of what had happened, on both sides, with clarity and without the softening that makes clarity impossible. It was the closing of a chapter in terms that were accurate, not in terms that were comfortable. I met Jade at a coffee shop in Midtown on a Saturday morning. She arrived before me, which I noted, an act of respect, of not making me wait, that was different from the Jade I remembered. She looked like someone who had been through something, which she had. New motherhood and the crisis of Eli's first days, and the truth she had finally told, and the 3 years of the lie before the truth. All of it was in her face in the specific way that consequences live in the face of someone who has been carrying them. She had Eli with her, in a carrier on her chest. He was 3 weeks old and sleeping with the complete commitment that only newborns achieve, entirely uninterested in the significance of the room he was in. I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at Jade. She said, "I don't know how to start." I said, "Start with what you did and why. Not the version you told the family. The actual version." She started. It took 40 minutes. Some of it I knew. Some of it I had not known. The specific mechanics of how the story had been constructed and delivered. The particular things she had said to Nana Abena that had been designed to land in the places Nana Abena's instincts would be most activated. She had known her grandmother well. She had known exactly which language would produce the response she needed. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I said, "Why?" She was quiet. I said, "I'm not asking rhetorically. I need to understand what you were trying to accomplish. Not what you told yourself you were doing, what you were actually trying to do." She said, "I was angry, and I was embarrassed. And I knew that if I admitted what had happened and that I had been part of it, I would lose standing in the family. I would be the one who had gone after my cousin's partner. That was not the story I wanted to be in." I said, "So you put me in it instead." She said, "Yes." The yes was direct and unqualified and cost her something to say, which meant it was real. I said, 3 years, Jade. 3 years of my mother sitting at tables I wasn't invited to. 3 years of Nana Abena not calling me. 3 years of being someone my own family believed had done something I didn't do. She said, "I know." I said, "I need you to know what that costs. Not as a punishment. Because you told a story and stories have weight, and the weight lands somewhere, and it landed on me, and I need you to have the full accounting of it." She was crying by the time I finished. Eli stirred against her chest, and she put her hand on his back automatically, the reflex of a new mother, and he settled. I looked at the baby. I said, "I'm not going to pretend this is resolved because we've had this conversation. It isn't resolved. What it is started." She said, "What do you need from me?" I said. "I need you to tell the truth to whoever in the family still holds a version of what you told them. Not a revised version, the actual truth. That's the first thing." She said, "Okay." I said, "And I need time. I can't tell you what this relationship becomes from here because I don't know yet, but I'm not writing it off. I'm giving it the space to become something honest." She nodded. She said, "Thank you for coming to the hospital." I said, "I came for Eli." She said, "I know, that's what undid me." I drove home and sat in my apartment for a long time. Not with grief exactly, and not with triumph, but with the specific quiet of someone who has been carrying something heavy for 3 years and has just set it down in a place where it can be examined properly in the light. The Osai family is in the slow process of the thing that families do when a truth finally surfaces in them. The reorganization, the individual conversations, the renegotiation of who owes what to whom and how those debts are paid. My mother and I have spoken every day since the hospital. Real conversations, the kind that go below surface. She is doing the work of accounting for her 3 years of silence that I know is costing her, and I am doing the work of receiving that accounting without either softening it for her or weaponizing it, which is its own daily effort. Nana Abena calls on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, she is 74 and some Sundays are full, but most Sundays, the calls are not long. They are the calls of an older woman and her granddaughter finding their way back to something they both value, moving carefully because the ground has shifted and neither of us knows exactly where the solid parts are yet. Jade has been telling the truth. She has told Quame. She has told Celeste. She has told the cousin who had been most vocal in the family communication in the immediate aftermath of the original story. None of these tellings have been easy, and all of them have been necessary, and she is doing them, which is the most I can ask and more than I expected. Eli is healthy. He came through the hemolytic disease with the resilience of new humans who have not yet learned to be anything other than relentlessly alive. He is 8 weeks old now and has, by all the photographs Celeste has sent me, a serious expression and a spectacular amount of hair. I have not met him in person yet. That meeting is coming, Jade has asked, and I have said yes, and we are finding the day. I think about the 11:47 call sometimes, about the 4 rings I let pass before I answered, about the which hospital I said next, without thinking about the 3 years or the cost, because a child was sick and I could help. I could have not answered. I could have let the 4 rings run to voicemail and called back in the morning and said I had been asleep, which was a plausible and self-protective thing to do. I answered because that is who I am. I have spent 34 years being the person who answers, and it has cost me things I did not always choose to pay. The 3 years of silence were in part the accumulated cost of a lifetime of absorbing more than I should have, of making my family's comfort more important than my own honesty, of being the achiever who achieved and accommodated and never quite demanded to be seen fully. I do not regret answering on that Tuesday night. I regret that it took a neonatal crisis for my family to be reckoned with what they had done. Those are different regrets, and I hold them differently. What I know now at 34, that I did not know at 31 when the silence started. Being the person who answers is not a weakness. It is not naivety. It is not the absence of self-protection. It can be the fullest expression of what you believe about human life and your place in it, that when someone small and sick needs what you have, you give it. Not because it makes you safe, not because it is easy. Because you are the kind of person who lives that way, and that kind of person in the long accounting is the one who gets to look back without regret. The phone rang at 11:47. I answered, and everything that needed to change finally did. If you have been the one who was lied about, cut off, and made to carry someone else's story, this one was for you. The truth has a way of surfacing. You just have to still be standing when it does. Subscribe and stay close. There is more.